with Mission Trips Made Easy. And before we get going, let's go ahead and pray. Lord God, our Heavenly Father, we come to you and we know that you have put us into so great of a situation, a place where we can go out and we can make disciples because it's something that we're called to do. Lord, we thank you for the opportunities that you put before us. We ask, Lord, for your hand of blessing upon our time together, bless our discussion, and bless the fruits that come out of it. Because, Lord, we know that we can't do anything without you. All of these things we ask in your name. Lord Jesus, we pray. Amen. So, why am I doing this? And this is a question that I found myself asking a lot as far as this presentation itself. Over the years I've been coming to BPM, and this is my fourth or fifth time here, I tended to observe a lot of these presentations tend to be theoretical, like ones regarding mission trips or regarding different best practices that are going on. And essentially the idea is, this is what we do, good luck, have fun, take it, see what happens. My goal is for you to leave with confidence that you could actually make this work in your own congregation, at least take away something that you can utilize. Again, like I said, anything that I have today, anything that I've given to you, anything that I posted, so if you have the app, I dropped a large thing in there as well. So any of this is free to you to use, utilize it, change it, do whatever you want with it. Our goal at Holy Trinity is not to have these things and basically keep them bottled up. Our goal is for you to use them in whatever way you see fit for your ministry. So to make this all tangible and applicable across multiple sites is really what I'm trying to do. So if you run into something, if you have a church that's done mission projects over the course of the time, you're like, hey, we've done this differently, by all means, throw it out. Because my biggest thing here is that this, I know, can seem very daunting, especially if you've never led these before. It was when I came out and they were like, hey, by the way, this is one of the things you get to do. And it was like, oh, lovely. I haven't done that before. But praise God that the situation I was in was one where the people have a lot of experience. My thing, too, is that there's so many details that are easy to miss, and so many that are very situationally specific. So you might have a situation where you're like, this is something we do that works great, but it just simply doesn't work for Merrill, Wisconsin. It really depends situationally on where you're at. And obviously, this, I think, is a disclaimer that I have to throw up. In no way, shape, or form are we going to cover all of the details in this, because, let's be honest, you want to go home tonight. My goal, though, is for you to walk away feeling like this, if you haven't done it, something you can undertake, or potentially if you have, maybe that you figured out something else that you can add to it. So, any questions as we kind of jump in there? And just by a quick show of hands, how many have led a mission trip through their congregation? How many are interested in leading a mission trip through their congregation? That's a stupid question because otherwise you wouldn't be here. There's any number of ones that you could be in. So these are several disclaimers. I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form on any of the things that I'm presenting. And also, this one I cannot emphasize enough. None of these are original ideas on my part. Basically, one of the things I'm blessed with is at Holy Trinity, as I stepped into this, as I point out, a lot of the information I'm sharing comes from members, former vicars, organizations with whom we work, and GASP non-Lutheran sources. So probably non-Lutheran sources. I'll cover that up the microphone as I say that. So really what we try to do is we try to take the best practices that we can find and utilize them in our mission outreach experiences. I would be remiss if I don't point out a few people who really kind of got the ball rolling at Holy Trinity. One of them is Dr. John Gruno. He's a longtime member of Holy Trinity, currently serves as our congregational president, led mission trips for years at Holy Trinity. John probably would be doing a much better job of this than I am, but he's too modest to present anything that would be called a best practice, so hence I'm here. I'm not. Mission trips at Holy Trinity, they did begin with a former vicar. The former vicar's name is now Pastor Christian Wood. He's serving at Hales Corners Lutheran. He is actually the one who brought the idea of going on a mission trip to Holy Trinity first. So again, it started with a former vicar. Some information comes from Groundwork Guatemala, an organization with whom Holy Trinity has worked in the past. We still financially support. Also, some comes from Ysleta Lutheran Mission in El Paso, Texas, the group with whom we're currently working. And again, some of this has been utilized from other sources as well. So, any questions about this before we kind of hop on in? Okay. If you have a question, even just shout it out. At Holy Trinity, one of the... Oh, I probably should advance my slide. Oh, that's not helpful. At Holy Trinity, we began our preparation about 9 months in advance. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just so you can see that slide and then drop it. It might not be possible depending on your context. So what I've done is I've kind of adapted this to about a 6-month process. So we have this going almost all year. For instance, just recently, John called me and he and I were talking about our trip that we took in October down to Ysleta, and like his exact comment was, you know, we got to start talking again about going in October because it's almost January, and it's January, and this was literally right after we had gotten done with Christmas, and we're like, oh, okay, here we go, let's get this going again. So we're actually doing something slightly different this year, something that I'll explain here going forward, but the reason for our long prep is that we want to allow our team to mesh together. The idea is that as the team is going, it's not going as separate individuals. Everyone's going with kind of one heart, one mind, knowing what we're hopping into. The bigger of the packets that you have has these mission trip agendas. And that essentially kind of starts from April and goes into October. So I tried to adapt it for you guys to about a 6-month, give or take, time frame. Our initial meeting is just kind of the getting ready. It's the idea we're trying to find out who's interested in going and see what gifts and talents they might have. Typically, our meetings go between about 3 to 3.5 hours on a Saturday morning. The early ones obviously are not nearly as long as some of the later ones. However, I would actually recommend we try to jam a lot into our meetings, in part because sometimes it's really about the only time you can meet. If you have a smaller group, or if you have a smaller church, you could actually adjust that and maybe narrow up the focus a little bit, and then, or even maybe try to have a couple of meetings a month if that's something that fits you a lot better. But at Holy Trinity, we just do one large meeting, one Saturday during the course of the preparation periods. That, like I said, the meeting tends to run a little long, but that's because we do jam a lot in. If you look at these handouts here that I mentioned, I'm just going to steal one off the front. So one of the things that we do, we have this opening Bible study and prayer, and this, in the past, I led one. John this year took the lead on leading it. The whole idea behind this is kind of getting everyone together, focusing on whatever our missional verse is. So like if we're going, in this particular case, we utilize the idea of monumental that we had done for our VBS. And so we were like, you know what, we're going to kind of adapt our VBS from this year that we did at Holy Trinity and just utilize that down in Ysleta. And so kind of focusing on the story of Joseph. And so everything kind of flowed out of that. But you can kind of do whatever you would like there. If you notice there on April 9th, number 2 and number 3, the discussion on poverty and then the release of rights and group covenant. This actually does come from Groundwork Guatemala. We just essentially... plagiarized is the wrong term, but basically just took it and put our own logo on it. So, yeah. Anyway, they gave us permission, by the way. So the upside, what this basically is this is reminding people that we're all going in this together, like essentially trying to unite the group together, giving up the right to, you know, be comfortable. Because part of the reality sometimes on mission trips is you run into things that aren't comfortable. It could be the situation that you find yourself sleeping in. It could be the weather. It could be what you're seeing. There's any number of things that could lead to you being uncomfortable, but recognizing offhand, this is something that could take place. This year, we were very blessed, and it was an awesome experience for us. We actually had our age gap. The youngest who went was 16. Our oldest was 76. So we had a 60-year age gap, which was fantastic. And our 76-year-old who went along was an original member of the church. Holy Trinity only started in 1986, so for all intents and purposes, we're a baby. But Lewis was an original member. He had worked with Habitat for Humanity before. And so this year we expanded to a house build with Yezleta along with a VBS, and he was like, I can do that, and came along, and it was a really cool thing to see how he meshed in with some of our high school students. Like they got him to admit like that he wore yellow because it's his wife's favorite color, even though he personally hates yellow. Like it was such a cool thing to see, this adaptation going on between the group, and that's part of the reason why we have such a long prep. And then when they got there, it really even expanded to the point where still, even now, and we got back in mid-October, he still comes down and sees them on Sunday mornings to say hi, give them a hug before he goes up to church with his wife. And so it's just a way to build these relationships as well that hopefully are lasting and sometimes are intergenerational. Go ahead. Sorry.
You talk about these long preparations.
Yes.
Do you often have a large turnover in terms of who actually attends these missions?
Great question. The question is, do we have a lot of turnover in regard to who attends because of the long prep? Sometimes, yeah. Like in the couple of years that I've been leading this, from the original group, 1 year, our first year was about 15. We ended up taking 11. This last year, our original meetup was about 25, and we took 19. So you lose some over the time as it goes. One gentleman dropped out just because of health reasons. As he started looking at it, he's like, you know what, this just wouldn't be smart. Others sometimes might look at it, and it interacts with work schedules. So we don't have probably quite as much as you would assume, but there is some.
Well, I'm thinking about year to year.
Yeah.
Our church,
yeah.
like in St. Paul, our church is very experienced in both domestic and international missions, and Yezleta being one of the ones we've been doing that for like 15 years.
Yeah.
We get a lot of the same people every single year. We don't actually, and to me that's a problem.
Yes.
We don't get a lot of new people involved. But a lot of long prep is going to be a turnoff for people. If you've got a team of 10 or 12 that have done it for 10 years. But it sounds like what I'm wondering, if you get new people every year.
Yeah.
That really need that long prep.
That's a great question. We really do run into the same issue, where many of the same people are going along or leading or joining in. One of the things that was helpful this year was we actually actively were recruiting. Like as an example, the gentleman I mentioned who had worked with Habitat, I knew that, so I said, hey, what do you think about this? And the more he thought about it, and after discussion with his wife and kind of all the different realities that come into it, because I mean, it is a big commitment when you think about it. You're leaving home for a week, which might not seem quite as long, but it is. And he came back and he was like, you know what, this sounds great, actually. I really am interested. He had never been to that part, like he had never been to El Paso, Juarez area, and so he was like, you know what, sounds great, count me in. Our high schoolers were recruited. Our DCE right now, she's actually presenting on Gen Z. She was a vital asset for this because she went on CUI, had this around the world in a semester program, and she was a part of that. And so missions are a huge thing for her as well. And she recruited 3 of our high schoolers to join in and come along. And so really just kind of active recruitment, trying to expand. But then you do find towards the end, we went with a very similar team that we had the year before. It wasn't the exact same, which was good. We added, but it was very similar. So, does anyone else have any other stories along those lines? Do you find that you're taking roughly the same people, or do you have different teams that go? Roughly the same.
And that's a problem. I'd love to understand how better to.
You're probably I mean, we have new people every time.
Yeah. But it's always kind of the same core group. And I mentioned, and this would be a good time to bring it up, like at Holy Trinity, we're changing how we do it just a little bit. We're actually going to go to 2 different trips. We're going to go to Yezleta in the fall, kind of do a house build there, and then do a VBS, possibly with Alaska Missions for Christ, having already talked with them, LAMP, something kind of in a different area, different region. Kind of wondering if maybe that might change a little bit. John, the gentleman who's really done this forever, he would love to just be able to go and not have all the weight of leading the trip, but just be a member of the trip. And so by shifting for lack of a better term, the reality of where we're at, if we're in an area that is colder climate-wise, and different language that's being spoke, maybe if that'll help people's brain shift a little bit in the idea of John isn't leading, because John's led this group to Guatemala, he's led them to El Paso, and so it's like if we kind of shift that might help him be able to kind of ease his way into a different position as well. Is that necessarily what's going to happen? Who knows? He's one of those people that if you could clone him, it would be amazing, and this world would be much better for it, because he's a gentleman who will never completely step out of this, I don't think, because that's just who he is. And you guys probably, I would hope, I pray you all have somebody like that in your church, because those are the people that really make what we're doing really a lot of fun to work with, because those are the people that just, you can't speak highly enough of them. But my goal for him would be that he can go along and just enjoy it and be a part of the trip, as opposed to somebody forgot something or something broke or there's an issue and having to go and talk to him right away. So.
Do you have age limits on it? Do you cut it off on the younger end? Because me, I can see a grandfather and a grandson wanting to go or whatever.
Yeah. What we usually go off is most places will have their own. So like in the case of, and I know you said you work for Alaska Missions for Christ, is there a age limit that you guys have roughly, or?
Usually 16 to 18, and it kind of depends.
Circumstantially too, yeah.
I'm working with Anchorage Lutheran, in March,
Yep.
they're coming up, so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
normally, depending on where you're going, there's other concerns, so.
Yeah, I think Ysleta was 14. But if you're under the age of 18, you have to have a parent along with you. Or under 16, have to have a parent, something to that effect. So, yeah, it does depend on the circumstance as well. So go ahead. Do you have a question as well? Yeah. Okay. So really the biggie is trying to join hearts and minds together as we go forward, and prepare for the task ahead. The singing in Spanish thing, this one, I really enjoy, because so many of those songs just get so ingrained in your head. They just get stuck and they do not go away. Like, for instance, Cristo Te Ama, like, I sing Jesus Loves Me, and in my brain, that's what I'm singing, because I'm so used to singing that one. Trying to basically help our people, even give them some rudimentary Spanish, especially if we're going to an area like Guatemala or Juarez. I'll get 1 second. One of the interesting things, and this is something sometimes that'll scare people off. I know the first time when we went to El Paso, they told us, they said, be careful what you say around the kids, because in El Paso, almost every kid speaks English fluently, because that's what they have at school. But they won't speak English to you because, well, why? They can speak Spanish and you won't understand them, or so they think. And so that's kind of one of those interesting things that, regarding where you're at, a cool thing about Spanish is people who have never been to a place like this, at least even trying to equip them a little bit to have a conversation. We took a lady to Juarez who, she had pretty much no Spanish skills whatsoever. And she was very, very nervous, and she was like, how do I interact? And like we said, the whole point is kids identify when you're actually there and you care. It doesn't matter if you speak their language. Like, she tried and the kids all laughed and they gave her a hug. Like, basically, you're trying, they love the fact that you're trying. They might find it hilarious how you're trying, but they love the fact that you're trying, and they love the fact that you're there. They enjoy the fact that you're there. And so that was really kind of that's my advice when people ask me about that, is it's, it's not a requirement. Like most places, like Ysleta or in Groundwork, Guatemala, have translators that go with you. But just try. It could be that high school Spanish that you took a long time ago and don't remember anything about it. But like I said, mostly what you'll get is you'll get the kids smiling and they'll enjoy it, and it's fun, even if you're not fluent.
Yeah, I would just throw in, the kids are paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to say. I mean, when I was in Cambodia, we're helping build schoolrooms. We have all the little kids around us. I mean, I got all the kids to play in a round of Duck Duck Goose.
Yep.
I didn't know Khmer.
And this is one of those places where you can really talk about like the idea of love itself being a language. Because if the kids know that you're there, if they identify that you're there helping, that you enjoy being around them, and just even, presence, the ministry of presence, sometimes just makes all the difference in the world. So jumping forward here, we're about 6 months out, give or take. The top one, typically we do decide if we're doing a VBS, dividing up responsibilities, determining various gifts of the team. Pro tip, it is always so helpful to take someone who can play the guitar. If somebody can play the guitar, music-wise, you're going to be pretty well set. That is a really helpful thing. We have a gentleman who is incredibly adept, who loves doing mission trips, and so we are very blessed again. But yeah, that is always extremely helpful. Dividing jobs up among the group should take place at this meeting as well. Those handouts that you have, you can kind of see an example on that, as well as in that big booklet that I gave out. So you get the idea, essentially. So what we'll do is like this person is responsible for this day of VBS, or this person is responsible for this day of VBS. In this big book that, again, it's in your app, I just felt really bad about all the paper I was utilizing. So I did drop it in the app for you. What I have in here, and I have all our itineraries which run into it, but this sheet, basically what we did is we essentially laid it out where we did a VBS in the morning, and then there was also a house site going on at the same time. And so the idea was these people are at VBS in the morning, and then in the afternoon they come over to the house build. It worked out okay. We got the house done by the grace of God. Like at the 11th hour, we ended up staying, I think, later than they were really wanting us to. But we got it all done. We were very excited. But having 19 people on the build site was a little much. There are a lot of, until we got to the point of painting and all that, there was kind of a lot of, what do you want me to do? And it's like, well, there is only so many tools that we can utilize. Some of our high schoolers, though, got very, very good at using the nail gun, which was kind of entertaining to watch, because the second they were like, hey, do you want to use this? They're like, yes. And so they pick it up, and it's... So anyway. Again, at this meeting, start to discuss travel arrangements. One of the biggest ones that I discovered that is helpful, most airlines do have that group travel package. That makes things easier, and then you only have one person who's managing the travel arrangements. That was something we did this year for the first time. In the past, what we've done is actually we booked different flights on Southwest, like in the blocks. But then the problem is when it comes time to check in using Southwest, like mass check-in and then standing in their cattle lines, you get to the point that you have some people way in the front of the plane, some people way in the back, and so using the group travel was much, much easier. And also with all the lovely reality right now of going on, that's going on with like the airline industry and having trouble, getting through when you actually call somebody. Group travel line, usually we would call and go right through because group travel was separate from regular travel. So any questions about this stuff or any things that you guys have used? Sorry, go ahead.
Just a question.
Yeah.
In your planning,
Yes.
6 months out, can you maybe speak to like COVID and maybe fears among the congregation participants and maybe even the different countries and organizations that you've gone to and the fears and maybe the restrictions that they've had?
Yeah, we started going to Yesleta in part because historically they had always gone down to Guatemala. And Groundwork Guatemala operates out of Guatemala City, and then from Guatemala City you go to various locations. The biggest the biggest worry we had with that was, and I don't believe that, I think that Guatemala is still pretty shut down, especially some of the more rural areas, because they've just been slow getting vaccines out in those locations. And one of my biggest fears also is you don't ever want to go into an area and bring something into the area. It's kind of that when helping hurts thing, that if there's even a possibility that somebody can get sick, that's something that makes me very nervous. This last year with Juarez, going into Juarez, I know Mexico had a very robust vaccination program from what I understand. That's at least what I've been told through YLM. They also, interestingly enough, they were able to continue. They have a church called Santa Biblia that's essentially up on this bluff overlooking New Mexico. It's a gorgeous location. They actually were able to keep meeting on that site all throughout COVID shutdowns because it was a food handout site. And so they were determined to be a humanitarian organization. And so your shutdowns kind of vary, and especially COVID kind of being what it is now, we didn't have quite as many worries with our group going this year as we did the previous year. So we've now gone 2 years post-COVID. The first one, there was a lot of, and you're signing the forms and all of that, and also recognizing that, you know what, that's part of life. If somebody gets sick right at the 11th hour and it's time to go, we got to adjust. And it is what it is, unfortunately. We haven't had anybody drop out because of fears of COVID, though, which has been good. And we try to ensure, and that's one of the things that, like John and I in our preparation, we discuss a lot. We want to make sure that everyone who goes has a experience that basically when they come back, they want to tell people, hey, you know what? This is cool. Like, this is an amazing experience. You really feel that you are there doing ministry. You're working with people. You're telling them about Jesus and the amazing things he does for them. And that's one way to grow the program. But also the flip side to that is you want to make sure that they're feeling safe, they're feeling secure, that people aren't nervous about what's happening around them. And so trying to buffer as much as you can. And so what helps, honestly, with the COVID thing for me, again, one of those places where I'm blessed, is that John, I mentioned Dr. John Gruno, he's a medical doctor. His wife, Peggy, who also is gone forever, Peggy's also a medical doctor. So we have two doctors who basically are able to help alleviate fears, if you will, on that end. And so that's one of the places where COVID hasn't been as big of an issue for us because of that, that we have two people who are medical doctors going, you're fine, it'll be okay. Like, so. But, yep.
Just at our church, we're very fortunate to have a professional travel agent as a member who
Yep.
has been, and actually she specializes in international travel.
Oh, nice.
It's very helpful to have someone who's a professional agent to help with all the arrangements. And if you don't, try to cultivate a relationship with one that maybe not being a member and go to them on a regular basis because they already know what your group needs.
You have to kind of help guide you. One of the things, and I did point that out, I would not recommend utilizing, this kind of does get into the COVID thing a little bit, some of those cheap travel sites that you can use, because unfortunately what I've found, and this has more been a personal thing I found with them, is that if you go to cancel, like if something comes up, you normally can't get a refund. Basically, it's like, well, sorry. And so that's why we've always gone through the airline for that reason. Like one of the gentlemen who had the health issues that decided, you know, I just probably wouldn't be smart if I go along. He dropped out after we'd already purchased plane tickets. And Southwest was really good about going, you know what, that's fine. We can back apply that, or we can make that work some other way. And so we were able to go through a different line and be able to get that worked out. So about 5 months out, the big focus here really for us is on our fundraising, like what we're going to do with this, and that's a helpful reason to book travel early and have kind of a set team. Depending on your fundraising needs, 5 months also provides the added benefit of booking a location. I have no idea what I was trying to say there. Hold on one second. Trying to figure out added benefit of booking a location if you need to like stay at a different site. So like if you're going someplace and you have to stay off-site, 5 months gives you this and also provides you obviously with enough of a buffer where you're not going to be paying way too much in order to take the plane. So also one of the neat things that we did this year, and I mentioned we have a gentleman who goes along who is very musically adept. He and a friend actually kind of created like a little band, and they ended up doing a fundraiser, and that kind of goes along with this as well with the fundraising needs. So they actually booked a show it's a place called the Chicken Shack, and it's in Arcadia, Oklahoma. So whatever you have in your minds is probably true. It essentially just an outdoor stage that they got up and they did an actual like music like band show, and were able to raise a lot more money than we have at a lot of our previous fundraisers, and it was really cool. It was a fun night. Got a lot of church members who came out, and of course the Chicken Shack was happy because, well, they sold a lot more chicken that night. So it was really kind of a neat experience, something that we were able to do in part because it was so far out. It was, I think we did it in July or August for our October trip. So at Holy Trinity, we're starting to move in this direction, dividing the cost, going about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Where about 1/3 is fundraised, 1/3 is paid by the church, and then 1/3 is paid by the individual. Obviously, there are, to this particular one, if the person needs help, no one's going to be denied the ability to go because they can't pay 1/3. We would, in that case, figure out a way to make it work. But the goal is that way the people who are going along also have a little bit of element as well in this, that it's kind of almost a commitment as well in and of itself. So another detail you'll notice in those documents is we do try to lay out what's going on daily. The goal isn't necessarily to plan our time, but rather to give members a distinct idea of roughly what to expect. So if you kind of get the idea it's actually in the book, sorry. With this kind of an idea, roughly this is where you're going to be at. This is what you're going to be doing. Also in this, so you see kind of our spreadsheet here where it's like, this is about what you can plan to be doing on Wednesday, October 12th at about noon. We're going to be eating lunch on the site. Again, is this set in stone? No. It can change depending on the circumstance, because that's part of the reality when you're in some places. Like I mentioned, we got the house done very late, so we were planning to be home on Friday by 5 with the house building and be able to kind of hang out at the house and be happy that we got everything done. We didn't get back to the house until about 7:30 that night because it wasn't finished and we wanted to get it done. And so recognizing that it's not going to be perfect, but this does help ease some uncertainty for people who are especially new to the trip. You can guesstimate this is where we're going to be at. And again, recognizing that things change. So. Schedule planning. If you plan to do a VBS, by this meeting, you do want to start putting together different days. Foci are adopting a curriculum that you used over the summer. Adapting, sorry, not adopting. Because the curriculum that you used over the summer, which would be my recommendation, especially depending on what organizations you work with. Like, if I remember correctly, I think Alaskan Missions, you guys have something that works up with group as well as with CPH, is that correct? As far as VBS goes, Yesleta, our CPH curriculum that we purchased, or a group curriculum, we can bring it down and use it. Basically, you purchase the curriculum, so that's something to use. I would recommend double checking, though, with your provider just to be safe. But if you need to make the adaptions, I would strongly recommend it. Traditionally, this is a little different for us because in Guatemala, you basically plan one VBS, like one day, and then you go to different sites. So basically, you're at 4 or 5 different sites during your time in Guatemala. So essentially, you only need one day planned. So a little different for us going to Yesleta, where basically you're planning a full week of VBS where you're on the same site. So that's one of those things that we've had to make this difference a little bit. In your packet handout there, you will notice that where it talks about this idea of a cultural focus, and this would be... I want to say it's under the May meeting. The cultural focus was something that we were doing kind of for our group itself. The idea of, like, this is something that when we were there before, people were asking, well, what is that? What is that? One thing you'll see in Juarez is a big giant X. It's a big red X. It's just kind of in the middle of the city. And so wondering, well, what is that? And so trying to have different focuses on the culture in which we're actually going to as well. Just to try to call attention of our people to the fact that, yeah, we are stepping outside of our comfort zone. Yeah, it's right here. It's May, under 4 of the VBS topics. It's real small. I apologize for that. But so there are just different things that then we would have that as a part of our morning devotions, like some background history on what's going on in the area where we're going to be serving. So the last one, and this is important, you want to make sure you finish your team's forms and travel documents 4 months out. The biggest one, and this is one that when I first started doing this, I was like, oh, that's a thing, is travel insurance. Because that was something I'd never thought about. It was like, oh, insurance is fine. No, actually, the second you leave the United States, your insurance doesn't work anymore. So it's one of those things that, for me, was something that they pointed out, and it was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I forgot about that. But thankfully, again, where I work is one step below heaven because we have a variety of people who are able to step in and help me. Like, for instance, our executive director, who put me in contact with our insurance rep, who basically saved my bacon in that. Your church's insurance company should have a policy for out-of-country travel, or could, but if they don't, hopefully they can put you in contact with somebody who does. Also, wherever you might be going, they might have somebody to whom they can recommend. We use this group called Venture Travel Insurance. If that's through our insurance company, who they recommended. If you need help with that, if you're like, I am like completely lost, my contact info, I think, is all in the app, and I can give it to you if you're really interested as well. Feel free to give me a call, and I can try to help you out as well. But travel insurance is one of those things that it seems really easy to forget until you need it, and then you're really going to wish you had it. It's mandatory. Yeah, a lot of places will basically also need a certificate of insurance verifying that you have it.
And that's a part of the process for us, because that's just a part of what we do going into it.
Cool. Yeah, and it is as well for YLM, yeah. Yeah.
What do you do about emergency evac insurance?
I forget what policy. I think I bought probably a policy that was a lot more expensive than we needed. Because basically I think it encompassed everything, and then I didn't have to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a recommendation. Mission trips that I've participated in the past, especially when you start getting into, other continents, Asia,
Yep.
and places like that, because the cost. I've heard horror stories of people who lost their homes trying to be evacuated.
Yeah.
Because the cost is so high.
Yeah.
So.
Depending on who you go with, that would definitely be a question I would ask. Like I said, I purchased the top of the line one that I could get. Again, I probably way over purchased and way overpaid on it. But with that being said, that way I also knew in my brain that we're covered as much as I can, personally, as much as I can make us covered on this side of a broken reality.
Well,
So.
every team's have a different risk
Yep.
level tolerance.
Yep.
So some people are like that, whatever.
Yeah.
Nothing's gonna happen. Others are like, I don't want to have to think about this, period.
Yeah.
Just take care.
Yeah, and I tend to trend toward if it could go wrong, I'm expecting it to. So, so that's why I actually went ahead and did the high end. So the closer the date that we try to fundraise, we did find the better results we seem to have. But for fellow procrastinators in the room, that does not mean waiting until the very last second to actually do it. Because unfortunately, at a certain point, you are kind of out of time, and it's time to get on that plane and go. So, about 2 months out. So for us, this is really the meeting where we try to ensure all our craft ideas and VBS scripts are finished and ready to go. Another key detail of this one, and again, I talked about how I work in a very wonderful existence. A detail of this meeting, it's costume fitting for our VBS skits. We've had some amazing members who have basically over the years assembled all of these costumes. It's one of those, and I think every church has it, a closet that you don't know what it is as you walk past it until one day you open it and it's like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for all along. this one actually is in our teacher workroom, like hidden behind a wire shelving unit. And somebody was like, have you seen the costume closet? And I was like, the what? And they took me down and showed it to me. And it was like, oh, this will make my life so much easier for VBS stuff. So thank you for that. We also do use this as our chance to pack costumes and crafts. Another benefit, again, of flying with Southwest is their bags fly free policy, which we do take full advantage of. Typically, like, I'll carry on and then just take a bag with me that's packed full of stuff. So, as I'm sure probably many people do. That isn't just an us thing, I'm sure. And then really 1 month out is really that final prep. And this is where kind of getting into that booklet thing that I talked about. I prepared that booklet that contained all the information. If you want, I can send you a virtual copy. It is in your app as well. The reason why I did that this year, and I can speak to this a little bit. Last year, I found that there was a lot of times that it was like, oh, do we have this or do we have that? And so I'm like scrambling, trying to find all these different papers. So basically this year my thought was, you know what, I'm going to make my life simple and put it all in one place. And so essentially what this has all our VBS scripts, it has all our plans, it has our travel itineraries, it has what we're going to be doing during the day, it has our songbooks, it has everything in it. And then I just made booklets of it and passed it out to the group. Again, I did it mainly because it was something that, as I was kind of observing it, it was like, well, there's a lot of paper that we're taking. What if we take it all in one location? Another thing that we did, and this is just part of that final prep as well, is at YLM, you can actually, at Ysleta, you can essentially hire their cook where they'll cook for you. We decided to go ahead and do it ourselves because as kind of a team building activity, and so we created these meal teams and meal preparations. So basically everybody was assigned to a team, and then each team would get a meal. So like team 1 had, when we got their Saturday dinner, and then team 2 had to clean up. And then you have team 2 for breakfast, team 3 doing cleanup, team 3 for lunch, team 4 doing cleanup. Basically with the idea of, again, trying to get more teams, to members of the teams working together. The group that had me was sorely disappointed with my skills in the kitchen, but it's a lot of fun though too, because one year, our first year at Ysleta, we had a lady make just an incredible like enchilada casserole that she made so much. I think she made that on Wednesday, and I think we were still eating it on Saturday, and left some for the ladies to take. But by that point, it was still good because it was so good, but she just made so much of it. It is, yeah. You end up gaining weight, amazingly enough, as you're trying to leave. So,
I recommend taking them up on that, cooking before you.
yeah, and I can't speak to that, but go ahead, yeah.
I have not personally experienced it. I've only been to Ysleta once. Myself and my wife's been 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they've had, I can't remember her name offhand, who's in charge of the kitchen.
Yeah.
at Ysleta. They're recommended at least once.
Mm-hmm.
Besides, you also get to mingle with some of the local people too.
Yeah.
When she does that, so that's always a big bonus on mission trips.
Yeah, and Alaska Mission, and I know, is there any other groups represented? I know I've talked about YLM, I've talked about Alaska Missions, or any other groups? On Eagle's Wings. So what do you guys do, like, for meal prep and things like that for your groups, or meals? Prepare their own.
They go into pretty remote communities. We ask them to bring their own food or buy their food locally.
Cool.
And that's just part of the preparation that they have to do before.
Awesome. And then for
Alaska Mission's great. The teams will take it, and then like maybe one of the dinners, if you guys have enough time, then you come over to my house because I got a homestead. So then I'll cook for the team like one big dinner.
Awesome.
Whatever.
Cool.
Unless you're allergic to fish, then you're out of luck.
I have a feeling that's kind of a staple up there. If you're allergic to fish, you're in trouble.
Well,
Like,
it's kind of funny because usually I have like caribou or moose or whatever's in the freezer. So it's like, you ever try
When's the
this?
next time you're doing that?
Talk to Jan Brewitt, servant event coordinator.
we, sorry.
Well, actually, that was just a great point then. When's
Yeah.
the next time you're doing this?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're planning on covering it, but one of the things is we've got 4 mission trips represented in here.
Mhm.
If I want to do a mission trip, you've talked about the planning. Where do I go? How do I start? Where am I going? What do I want to do?
Stay tuned. And by the way, for those of you who represent different groups, I'll give you a minute here toward the end basically what group you are, where you're based, and who to contact, if you guys don't mind sharing that information with everyone in here. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that, as I was kind of going through this, I knew, obviously, of certain groups. I only learned, and I'll admit, I learned of YLM through their Bible ministry that they do, where basically you highlight different Bible verses in Spanish Bibles, write notes of encouragement, and they send them, and they give them out in the detention camps. That's how I first learned about YLM. I had no clue that they did mission trips, anything like that, until I started talking with Luce, their servant event coordinator. I learned of Alaskan Missions for Christ because Luce mentioned them as a possibility, and then the Seward connection, Jan Bruick, who's their servant event coordinator, her husband is the pastor at the church where I grew up. So it's like, I mean, the Lutheran world isn't really big, so recognizing some of these groups that we do have that we can work with is a hugely helpful thing.
Well, even if you don't really want
Yeah. You're going to meet a lot quick, yeah.
You can even talk to that one and say, this is what I'm looking for. Are you guys a fit, or can you refer me to somebody else?
Yep.
You know, because a lot of times, you know, maybe it's not a good fit.
Yeah.
And it's, but, you know, we all talk, you know, so it's like, hey, I know what this person does. I'm like, hey, I have, call them up, I'll connect you. Here's a joint email, you know, go do awesome.
And to that point, literally, the session I was sitting in a minute ago, not a minute now, 55 minutes ago. I know it probably seems a lot longer than that. I was down in the session that was being presented, and afterward, one of the professors I had at the seminary introduced me to one of the guys who's working with LAMP, Lutheran Association of Missionary and Pilots out of Canada. And so it's one of those, it's like, again, yeah, people talk, and at the end, we'll kind of talk through that real quick as well. So, again, my reasoning for the booklet is to help people keep all this information in one place. The biggest thing that I want to get to, of everything presented, if I could choose that you take one thing home and utilize it in your congregation or your mission trip, I pray it's this. It's this idea of the prayer partners. If you kind of look in your, I gave you kind of that prayer partner sheet. So it looks like this. It's called Foundational. How we do prayer partners at Holy Trinity is basically everybody is kind of set with a partner. The idea of the prayer partners is these are people who you're close to. It might be friends of yours. It might be somebody in the congregation that you haven't connected too much, but it's somebody who you as a pastor, if you're leading the group, is like, you know what, I want to try to get this person a little more connected into the church. And so reach out to them and say, hey, would you be my prayer partner for this? Would you pray for me as we're preparing for this, as well as while we're on this trip? How we do it at Holy Trinity is we actually send an email to the prayer partners every night. So the prayer partners then get the email blast with the pictures of what we've been doing, what's been going on, with the idea that then they can send that information out to different people in their network as well. The prayer partners during the commissioning service are a part of that as well, that they're in the commissioning service, like come up and like place their hands on the people who are going also. This year, one of our missionaries, and I mentioned Peggy, John's wife, again, two people that if every congregation could have somebody like them, we would be in such a wonderful place. She created this year. She works a lot with LWML and is one of our the Oklahoma district's LWML. I want to say at one point was like I forget the exact title, basically doing the prayers and working with the different groups. And she created this. Basically, the idea is it was more or less a 5 weeks. So for 5 straight weeks, asking prayer partners to set aside time, pray for the team, pray for the events, pray for the people to whom we're going to interact, as well as the people with whom we might even cross paths. And by that I mean, as you're driving back across the Border Patrol agent who stops you and checks all your forms to make sure you have everything right. And by the way, trust me, follow their directions, because I was driving the van last time and like I swore she waved me forward and apparently it wasn't me, and that is about as scared as I've ever been in my entire life. Foundational truth. So basically what Peggy did is she set this up, you can see starting September 11th, and then essentially it goes all the way through to the back page there. to Saturday when we come home. So essentially like covering all the way through. And the idea is that we ask our prayer partners to be in prayer for us. And also that the other reality of that as well is you know that you have somebody back home who essentially is like specifically focused on what's going on and what you're doing. My prayer partner for this last time was my wife, which I feel is like a little bit of a cop-out, but I also felt like that was an important thing to do. As well as my daughter, who's a 7th grader, and I thought that was a fun thing to get her involved with. So, again, if there's anything that you take away from this, it's that. I really strongly recommend it. It's a really cool thing. When they first explained it to me, it was one of those, I was like, how does this work? Prayer partner, like the person who gets the email, and then they explain it, I'm like, okay, never mind. That's really cool. So, is there any, and I talked about how I was going to ask you guys, especially you guys who represent different groups, if you don't mind, could you write your name and your contact info up on the board and so people can take pictures of it to utilize? Would that be cool? Can you guys do that? As you're kind of, as we're finishing up here, but are there any questions that anybody has? Go ahead.
Originally, I'm from Liberia, West Africa.
Yes.
20 years ago, before I came here in the United States, I was involved with receiving mission teams from here.
Perfect.
And I served along with some of them. We served as host
Mm-hmm.
for these mission teams. And you were talking about preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Cultural orientation and all of that.
Yeah.
I know how that is huge because some of the groups that I hosted, they have some serious challenge in mission field, challenges in mission field. Some were actually looking at some of the service practice more important than living out the gospel.
Yeah.
Connecting with individuals, and that was a problem.
Yes.
So I don't know in your preparation how much time you give to prepare people to see that they are going for different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Some great,
Yeah, than what you're used to.
yeah.
That was, we try to have a lot of those conversations just as we go through all the preparation. Like, this is a very different context. You are not going to see what you normally see. Edmond, where I live, it's a very affluent area. I mean, Edmond is a lot of professionals, white collar jobs. We went to Anapra, Mexico, Juarez, which used to be the city dump. And so, I mean, like I mentioned, we took some high schoolers along, and one of the things that was really neat about this, not only seeing the connection they made with like some of our older members, but also there was a little girl whose house that we were adding on a room. Basically, this little girl lived with, I want to say it was grandma and grandpa, mom, aunt, siblings, kids. Like there was like 15 people living in this little house that is half the size of this room that we're in. And like this little girl was just the bubbliest, cutest little girl. We had two of the ones we took two of the girls were named Abby. And so you had Abby Uno and Abby Dos, as she named them. And what was really cool is watching the connection that they made together, because like I mentioned how some people in the morning were at the VBS site and others of us were at the house build. So like one day I was in like trying to hang up insulation and just itchy and feeling miserable, and all of a sudden I hear like this really cute little voice going, Abby Uno, as she's wandering around looking, who Abby Uno was actually at the house build, or sorry, at the VBS. And then we're like, she's not here, dear, or Abby está en la iglesia. And so you hear a pause, and Abby Dos, as she's going around, like basically she's calling out for these friends. And having the conversation with the girls, because they even said, well, you almost just want to take her back. And it's like, well, you do, but at the same time, she's a little girl who lives with her best friends, her cousins. She knows she's loved. She knows Jesus loves her. And to be honest, in our context, it's like you drop her in the middle of suburban America, or even, I mean, here what we see here, like if she would walk onto this church campus, it would be almost like you could say totally different than anything she could ever begin to experience. And so getting to have that conversation was like, that's something that honestly for this entire last mission trip we went on, there's a lot of things that I cherish. That's one that I cherish the most, because getting to have that conversation with two high school girls who go to a high school where you have very high-end cars that kids are driving to school, and it's a very wealthy school district. Getting to have that conversation of perspective, and this little girl, she might not seem like she has anything by our standard, but she has everything she could ever want. She has parents who love her. She has grandma who will do anything for her, and she knows Jesus loves her. And so it's like, that's such a cool thing that you get to have that conversation, and that's part of the reason why we have such a long prep, and to have those conversations. And also that's not something really as a conversation you can have just like with 1 month of prep, even if it's with high school students that you have a pre-existing relationship, in my opinion, because sometimes it's going to be one of those where you have to have this long time period where you're getting to know people. And to be honest, and this is one of the hardest things I know sometimes for pastors, where you're real with somebody, where they see you, who you really are. Like we have a Realm that we use as our church software, and like my Realm photo now is this just goofy photo that they took of me when I walked around the corner. And I said it that way. I'm like, I don't really care, and people can look at it. It makes no difference to me. But it's being able to, you'll see people differently when you come back, because you've connected so much with them. And that's one of the really neat things that, to me, one of the most rewarding things, aside from the fact that you get to spread the gospel. I mean, what cooler thing is that? And working with people who are in a very different context than you, and you get to see different cultures and how they interact, and how really God has made this amazing world and put us in it to walk together side by side. And that's such an amazing thing that we get to do, and that's why I strongly recommend, if you need anything, if you're even considering this, do it. There's a lot of work. I'm not going to say that it's not, but do it. It's amazing. Yes. Yeah.
Your church is the Holy Trinity?
Yeah.
I feel in our local church in Lower Maryland, mission is not really the lifeblood of our church. I know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I see a little disconnect. So, the leadership team, or the leadership there up there, and the mission team.
Yeah.
That's really been a little challenge for me. When I got here, I felt like, okay, every local church in America, we just lay to assist like mission, mission with God, and
Yeah.
be excited about this. So weekly, I have 2 teams that go, 2 trips every year.
Yeah.
But it's like, these people, they have to do a lot of things for support of the leadership, and that is very concerning for me. I don't know how your church, do you have support for that?
We're very blessed, and at Holy Trinity, that the culture has kind of been developed where this mission, to be honest, when we're taking a break this coming summer, we're not going to go on, we're just going to go on the one to Ysleta toward October, November, in part because, like, in talking with Alaska Missions for Christ, it would have been a little fast of a turnaround to try to get something together by June, just from our perspective, as well as I know from Jan's perspective as well. So, like, the fact that we probably won't be doing one like this year up until toward the end of the year, people will be like, oh, that's weird. What's going on? Like, is COVID again? But with that said, we're very blessed because this culture has been fostered, and that has nothing to do with me. That has entirely to do with the way that our church leadership has valued the idea of mission, and going out and spreading the gospel, because we're not called to sit inside our church walls. We're called to go outside the walls, to have these conversations, to see people, and to go and to just be with them. And so that's something that we're blessed with. I know different churches, it really can be a challenge.
We are very strong on the community.
Mhm.
We got food banks, we got different outreaches.
Yep.
You took a global mission, it's like,
Yeah.
leadership.
I will say I had the question asked at one point. It was, well, why are you going there when there are a lot of people who need our help here? And my response to that, and like I said, I do a lot of our outreach and mission things. Like we have a grocery ministry that happens on the second weekend of each month. We have what's called Cook's Night Out, where we host a free meal for the community on Fridays. I basically started ticking down all the different things that we have, including like VBS and all that. I'm like, would you like to volunteer for any of them? And the guy was like, and walked. And so it was kind of one of those where the conversation ended. But at the same time, I also do understand when some people ask that. But that's why I think it's so important as a church to recognize that we're called to not only be in where we're at, but also to help people who aren't necessarily in our own backyards. I think it's a both and. You can do that. It isn't. There's nothing that says you can't. Obviously, finances can sometimes play a role in that. But if you can't, then I know there are some foundation groups like fantastic groups like Mission Central that support missionaries around the globe that you can support. If you can't physically take a group there, those are great groups to support that do amazing work. Or Alaska Missions for Christ, or Eagles Wings, or different groups that bring people in and help equip them to do it if you can't find the funding for it. So,
I think it's a simple question.
yeah.
Can you play the organ on Sunday?
Yeah.
And they say, no. You're like, well, you're right. You weren't called to do that, but you do these other things that you feel called to do, which is fine too.
Yep.
You know, so, but we can't have that, stopping. So, and I think Christian's church, the Hales Corner, does a really good church job at it, because they'll outline the local missions.
Yep.
They'll do because I had to go speak for doing the national side of that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then they bring in all the international, and they'll bring everybody in and pray over the missionaries, the ones they do local, up to they came in from Mongolia.
Yeah.
So, it's visible to the church what's going on. So that kind of brings it home to them that it can be all these things.
And that's a model at Holy Trinity that we're making a shift toward, is like being able to incorporate like our national groups or international groups, and then having them in front of people, recognizing that, hey, these are people who are out, they're the hands and feet, just like you are.
And that might be a building process too, because a lot of people are not comfortable with
No.
good, and they have to start and build their way up.
Yeah.
If you've never gone to multiple different countries and not used to visa requirements or passports or all that stuff. If you never left the state, then
Yeah.
coming up to see Canada is going to be a little bit of a stretch, eh?
The question got asked about, like, for us, do we get new people coming in? And one of the things and one of the benefits, honestly, that we saw also with Yesleta was you don't necessarily, like, historically, like I said, they'd always gone to Guatemala, which that's kind of jumping in with both feet. I mean, you're literally living in Guatemala City. For those of you, I don't know if anyone's been to Groundwork Guatemala, but I mean, that's a very different experience than like YLM, where you're staying in El Paso and you're driving into Mexico, and then, or you could do work in Texas as well. Or going to, the idea is to try to find a way that people who might be interested can kind of dip their toe in the water and get some experience with it before going in whole hog and saying, you know what, this is something I really want to do. Send me, I'll go to Guatemala, I'll go do that, I'll go to Cambodia or wherever it might be, that trying to provide people almost with this entry level point as well, that's something that this is something you can do, and it's something that we're called to do.
Are you seeing, I'm kind of seeing this in some groups, where, because I like reading group dynamics.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing, I'll pose this question to everybody else. In some of these groups, let's say, take for instance, I have a group of 10 people that come up to serve in Alaska. I'm starting to see more and more members of that group that are being brought along that maybe don't necessarily participate regularly in the, in church with that
Okay,
group,
yeah.
but they're like, hey, my buddy, I want to get him in, I got him to come along.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Are you guys seeing that for some of the groups, that people are using it as an outreach opportunity where maybe not the majority of the group member, but somebody got dragged along?
I see what
whether
you're saying,
it's
yeah.
my son or my, whatever.
Mhm.
And I thought that's one thing that surprised me, is to start seeing that more and more
Yeah.
over the past couple of years I've done this. So,
Are there red flags that raises for you, or concerns things that we should think about if that is happening?
well, I think number one, you have a doctrinal statement that you have.
Yeah.
Number two, the organization, how I do it is I'm a part of that process to meet the team beforehand. So I Zoom with them. So I'm already reading them. Who are my leaders? Who's experienced? Who is my person that's going to be a wild card? Who hasn't traveled?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, because especially working where I'm at,
Yeah.
it is a large jump culturally. So if you're not prepared for it, that's just going to increase your stress level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now if you've got a high stress environment going on and this person is not working with a team, now you got a leader whose attention is going here. So now it's inward facing and not outward facing.
Mhm.
So
That
that,
makes sense.
but you might get a person that is just, hey, I'm here to learn, and they just eat it up. So as far as having a person that's in that group as a leader, I think that's your main position to
Mhm.
be able to read what positions do I need, and then who do I have to fill those positions? Because if you're the leader and you're fulfilling everything, then you got a single point.
Yep. Go ahead.
To talk a little bit about that, I personally am as someone that will suffer a bit from travel anxiety, especially when I'm going to a country or I don't know the language, I don't know the culture, and I also can suffer from large group anxiety.
Mhm.
I get uncomfortable. I can do really well one-on-one, but when you add a third person, things can
Yeah.
go screwy. And I had an experience when I was at Atlanta, and we had a group of about 12, 15 people. We had 4 alpha males in the group. And me being one of them, there were 3 others that really just took over everything
Mhm.
and did everything. And they took all the leadership. They did everything. And here I was like, 2 days in, and I was really depressed because I felt like I wasn't doing anything at all for the group.
Yeah.
Everybody else was doing everything else. I shared that with somebody else in the group, and the next day she made it a point to pull me in and ask me to lead this group doing this. It's at a house build. Why don't you help put all the insulation in?
Yep.
And I'll tell you right now that raised my spirits tremendously, made the entire trip a positive experience. So the point is, looking for those people who may just be coming in, being dragged in, not being included
Yeah.
in the group. That's the time to get them included, bring them in, talk to them personally, and make sure they can contribute, encourage them, and actually direct them to contribute, because they're not even going to want to take the
Yep.
lead. They're going to have to give them the lead sometimes.
And one of the things at Holy Trinity that we found, like even the last couple of years, we've had some members who have gone along that they're very active with the mission, these mission trips. They're not quite as active maybe in other places. And so being able to maybe help them then, like they almost have like a group, like they recognize, okay, this is what I do well. And then being able also then to utilize and say, hey, you know what, when we were down there, you were awesome working with those kids. Have you ever thought about helping out with VBS? And trying to find other ways also to get people incorporated into your church as basically mission-minded people to fulfill both that thing locally, but also then internationally. And it's the thing about it, regardless, it's such an amazing blessing that we have to be able to do. That this is something that we can do. It's not easy. That's why you guys exist. People who are the ones who are literally on the ground doing those things almost year-round and being able to coordinate these teams, because that's a huge job. And thank you for what you guys do, because what you do is I know I couldn't do it. I mean, there's a lot that you guys put in work and time-wise and commitment-wise and that you sacrifice that to allow us to come in and come alongside and help. And thank you for that as well. That for sure. And do you guys mind, like I said, before you take off, can you put your contact info up there on the board, just who would be the outreach or the connect person? So that way if anyone is interested, they can reach out to like a Jan, or who would be you guys'
Me.
to you? Perfect. Yeah, if you guys don't mind writing that up real quick, so that way you can take a picture of it, you can write it down. I have in the back a few pamphlets from YLM that if you want to grab on your way out, their contact lady down there, her name is Luz Soto. So again, any of these organizations are amazing, and I can speak, like I said, I can speak on this too. I know I've looked into Eagles Wings as well, also a fantastic organization. So we do have some really amazing groups that we can partner with as churches who are going out and stepping into the mission field. Again, it's not going to be easy, but hopefully it's a little easier than it would have been. So anyway, thank you so much for coming, guys. God's blessings on the rest of your time, and I'll be around for questions if you have any.